Hi, this is Elder Vicki Baker with another reading from the work of Apostle Shane Vaughn. It's called Living Beyond Survival, Salvation in Sandals, The Purpose of Passover, written by Reverend John Shane Vaughn. The dedication is to every believer who has ever whispered, there has to be more than this. The epigraph, and thus shall ye eat, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. That's found in Exodus chapter 12, verse 11. Be advised, this book is full of surprises. One moment you are in a laboratory examining DNA under cold fluorescent light. The next, you are walking an ancient Roman road. Then you are standing in Egypt before the death angel passes. Then you are sitting on a couch with Darwin, listening to what he said. You must follow every road. Do not skip ahead. Do not assume you know where this is going. The paths twist. The scenery changes without warning. You will find yourself asking more than once, what is this book about? Stay with it. Every road leads to the same destination. Every road leads to life beyond survival. Part 1. The Tool of Biology. Understanding what DNA made you. Chapter 1. The Prime Directive. Have you ever noticed what happens to the human body after midlife? Not the obvious things. The gray hair, the reading glasses, the joints that announce the weather. Those are surface symptoms. I'm asking about something deeper. Something the medical journals discussed in clinical language but rarely explain. The recovery that used to take a day now takes 3. The energy that once seemed inexhaustible now requires management. The system that held together effortlessly now demands vigilance, maintenance, constant attention. Why? The standard answer is aging, but that's not an explanation. That's just a label. Calling it aging is like calling gravity falling. It names the phenomenon without revealing the mechanism. So let me ask the question differently. Why does the body begin to permit decay after a certain point? Why does the fierce biological resistance that characterized youth gradually relax? The answer is written in your DNA, and it's not what most people expect. Scripture told us long ago what science is only now documenting. In Genesis 3, verse 19 says, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." Isaiah 40, verse 6 and 7, "All flesh is grass, and all the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth." In Psalms 103, verse 15 and 16, we find, "As for man, his days are as grass, as a flower of the field, so he flourisheth. For the wind passeth over it, and it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more." The ancient writers knew the body is temporary. The flesh has an expiration date. What science now explains mechanistically, Scripture declared prophetically. I want you to know about something you've probably never considered. When you are young, truly young, in your teens and 20s, your body was a fortress. Cut yourself, healed in days. Catch a cold, fought it off in a week. Stay up all night, bounce back by the next evening. Push yourself physically. The body adapted, strengthened, rose to the challenge. There was a fierceness to your biology during those years, an urgency, a relentless drive to repair, rebuild, restore. Your immune system was vigilant. Your cellular repair mechanisms were aggressive. Your hormones were calibrated with precision. Everything worked together toward a common goal with an intensity you probably took for granted. You didn't have to think about health. Health thought about you. And then something changed. For most people, the shift happens so gradually they don't notice it at first. A little more stiffness in the morning, a little more time to recover from exertion. A little more effort is required to maintain what used to maintain itself. And then, one day, you realize the fortress is no longer being defended with the same intensity. The question is why? Not why do bodies age? That's the wrong question. The right question is, why does the body stop fighting so hard? What signal has been received? What mission has been accomplished? What changed in the internal calculus that caused the systems responsible for your preservation to relax their vigilance? The answer will disturb you. It should. Childbirth is the ultimate biological purpose encoded into your genetic material. Strip away romance. Strip away culture. Strip away sentiment and poetry and everything we layer on top of human existence. What remains at the genetic level is brutally simple. Survive long enough to reproduce, then pass the code on. That is the prime directive written in the flesh. I call it a prime directive intentionally. In the old science fiction series, the prime directive was the one law that could not be violated, the one command that overrode all others. For your DNA, that command is replication. Everything else is secondary. Everything your body does before midlife, the surge of hormones, the drive for connection, the ferocious energy of youth, the immune system's vigilance, the cellular repair mechanisms working overtime, all of it serves one biological end: continuation of the genetic line. Your DNA does not care about your happiness. It does not care about your fulfillment. It does not care about your dreams, your relationships, your spiritual growth, or your sense of meaning. Your DNA cares about one thing: replication. You are, from a purely genetic standpoint, a vehicle, a carrier, a temporary host for code that existed before you were born and intends to exist long after you're gone. This is not philosophy. This is chemistry. And Scripture saw it clearly. Look at John chapter 3, verse 6. That which is born of flesh is flesh. And what about Romans chapter 7, verse 18? For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. Aeschylus chapter 1, verse 2 through 4, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath the man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. Solomon understood what is the biological legacy. One generation passes, another comes. The DNA continues. The individual carriers are expendable. Consider the economics of it. Your body is an extraordinarily complex system. Trillions of cells, hundreds of thousands of biochemical reactions per second. Constant monitoring, adjustment, repair. Running this system requires enormous energy expenditure. Maintaining it in peak condition is metabolically expensive. Biology is not wasteful. Resources that don't serve survival and reproduction are resources that could be better spent elsewhere. Every calorie burned on maintenance is a calorie not available for reproduction or defense. So biology makes calculations, not consciously, of course. There's no little accountant in your cell running a spreadsheet, but logic is built into the system. Invest heavily in maintenance while it matters for reproductive success. After the threshold has passed, reduce the investment. This is why your body fought so hard for you when you were young. Every injured repaired quickly. Every illness fought fiercely. Every cellular error corrected aggressively, because you needed to survive to reproduce. The investment in your maintenance was an investment in genetic continuity. But once the continuity is secured, once the code has been passed on, the calculation changes. Why continue the expensive maintenance program when its purpose has already been served? This is not a flaw in biology. This is biology operating exactly as designed. Now, watch what happens after the reproductive mission is fulfilled. The shift is unmistakable if you know what to look for. The system's slow. Repair mechanisms become less aggressive. Hormones change. The body that once fought ferociously to preserve itself begins to concede ground. Things that are held together effortlessly now require conscious effort. Damage that would have been repaired overnight now accumulates. This is not coincidence. It is not random. It is not merely getting older. It is a signal. The body is responding to something. A message has been received at the cellular level, and the response is stand down. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, progressively, unmistakably. The internal systems that once prioritized preservation begins to deprioritize it. Why? Because the prime directive has been fulfilled. The code has been passed. The genetic mission is complete. From the perspective of DNA, the vehicle has served its purpose. Let me give you specifics because vague language won't serve you here. Testosterone in men begins declining around the age of 30. Not coincidentally. The years following peak reproductive activity. This hormone drove the muscle development, the bone density, energy levels, and competitive drive that made reproduction possible. As reproductive utility wanes, so does the hormone that supported it. Estrogen and progesterone in women drop incredibly at menopause. The biological marker that reproduction has ended. The symptoms of menopause that women experience are not malfunctions. They are the body systems recalibrating around a new reality. The reproductive mission is over. Growth hormone production declined steadily after puberty, accelerating in middle age. This hormone drove the development and maintenance of lean body mass, supported the immune system, and promoted cellular repair. As reproductive years close, the body reduces its investment in these maintenance functions. Thyroid functions often slows. Insulin sensitivity decreases. Inflammatory markers rise. Cellular quality control mechanisms become less efficient at identifying and eliminating damaged cells. None of this is accident. None of these is disease. This is biological executing its programming with cold precision. The fortress is standing down. Biology does not lie, but it does confess quietly in the language of cellular behavior and hormonal shifts and repair efficiency rates. Here is what it confesses. When the reproductive mission is fulfilled, the body no longer receives the same internal justification to resist decay with urgency. Maintenance is no longer enforced with the same intensity. The system does not rage against entropy. It gradually permits it. Not because the body has failed, but because something, it's not because something went wrong. Because, from biology's perspective, the primary assignment has been completed. What many experience as betrayal is, in truth, disengagement. The flesh was never designed to carry you indefinitely. It was designed to carry you long enough. Long enough for what? Long enough to reproduce. Solomon described this decline in poetic detail 3,000 years before modern gerontology. We find it in Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the windows be darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the streets, when the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. Also, when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail. Because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. The keepers tremble, the hands shake, the strong men bow, the legs weaken, the grinders cease, the teeth fail. Those that look out are darkened, the eyes dim. Yahweh told us what would happen to the biological machine. Now science explains why. At its core, DNA is not coded for truth. It is not coded for transistence. It is not coded for moral development or spiritual awakening or the pursuit of meaning. DNA is coded for one thing alone: survival. Not survival in any noble or elevated sense. Survival defined narrowly as persistence through reproduction. DNA does not ask what is right. It asks only what works long enough. It preserves function just well enough to pass itself on, even if that function is crude, limited, or ultimately self-defeating. This is the cold mathematics of genetics, and it has implications that most people have never considered. If DNA only cares about survival through reproduction, then everything after reproduction is what? Bonus time, biological overtime, existence without genetic mandate. The body keeps running, but the internal justification, the deep cellular why that drove all the furious preservation, has been satisfied. The urgency is gone. The mission is complete. And without mission, systems drift toward entropy. Here's an analogy that might help. Imagine a factory built for a single purpose to produce one essential product. The factory is state-of-the-art. The maintenance crews work around the clock. Every machine is monitored. Every breakdown repaired immediately. Every inefficiency addressed. The factory runs at peak performance because everything depends on the product. Then one day, the product is delivered. The contract is fulfilled. The purpose for which the factory was built has been accomplished. What happens to maintenance? If the factory has no other purpose, if there's no new contract, no new product, no new reason for its existence, the maintenance budget gets cut. The around-the-clock crews go home. The machines are still monitored, but not with the same urgency. Breakdowns take longer to repair. Inefficiencies are tolerated. The factory doesn't shut down immediately. It continues operating. But the driving purpose is gone. And without that purpose, decline is inevitable. Your body is that factory. Reproduction was the product. And once the product has been delivered, the maintenance budget gets cut. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. If you are reading this book, there is a good chance you are past the age of peak reproductive utility. The biological mission that your DNA was designed to accomplish has either been fulfilled or the window was closed. Which means, according to the cold logic of genetics, you are now operating without primary biological mandate. Your body is still functioning. Your cells are still dividing. Your heart is still beating. But the internal reason that drove all of that activity with such intensity during your reproductive years has been satisfied. You are, genetically speaking, in maintenance mode. And maintenance mode does not fight as hard. This is not meant to depress you. It is meant to awaken you. Because here's the question that biology cannot answer. If DNA's only purpose is survival through reproduction, if that's all the code was written for, then why do humans refuse to accept that as enough? Why do we seek meaning beyond biology? Why do we pursue truth at personal cost? Why do we sacrifice advantage for principle? Why do we grieve aging as something wrong rather than accepting it as fulfillment? Why does every culture in human history point towards something beyond the grave, something that DNA has no category for and cannot explain? The body follows the genetic script, but something in the human being protests it. What is that something? And where did it come from? The laboratory has no answer. The genome sequence contains no chapter on meaning. The chemical analysis cannot account for the protest. But the question persists, and the answer itself is evidence that we are more than the code that built us. Chapter 2, The Great Disengagement. Let me show you what actually happens inside the body after reproductive utility peaks. This is not speculation. This is documented biology, published in peer-reviewed journals, acknowledged by scientists across the ideological spectrum. What I'm about to describe is not controversial in the laboratory. It's only controversial in its implications. Natural biological systems are under strong selective pressure before and during reproductive years, and under dramatically weaker pressure afterward. The body does not maintain itself with equal intensity throughout life. It invests heavily when reproduction is at stake and reproduces that investment when reproductivity utility ends. This phenomenon has a name in biology: agonistic pleiotrophy. It means that genes which provide benefits during reproductive years can have harmful effects later in life. And natural selection doesn't eliminate those harmful effects because they occur after the genes have already been passed on. In other words, your genes don't care what happened to you after you reproduce. They got what they needed. What happens to the vehicle afterward is not their concern. Before reproductive maturity, the body is a fortress. Let me describe how comprehensive that defense really is. DNA repair mechanisms. Your genome takes thousands of hits every day from radiation, oxidative stress, chemical exposure, simple copying errors. In youth, multiply overlapping repair systems patrol the genetic material constantly. Base excision repair catches and fixes small lesions. Nucleotide excision repair handles bulkier damage. Mismatch repair corrects copying errors. Double strand break repairs addresses the most serious damage. These systems work with astonishing efficiency during reproductive years, catching and correcting errors before they can accumulate. Cellular quality control. Your body has systems specifically designed to identify damaged or malfunctioning cells and eliminating them. Apoptosis, programmed cell death, removes cells that have become dangerous. Autophagy breaks down and recycles damaged cellular components. The immune system patrols for cells that have gone rogue. During reproductive years, these systems operate with vigilance because a single unchecked mutation could threaten the genetic line. Hormonal orchestration. Dozens of hormones coordinate the body systems with exquisite precision. Growth hormone promotes tissue repair and regeneration. Sex hormones drive reproductive capacity, but also support bone density, muscle mass, cognitive function, and immune response. Thyroid hormones regulate metabolism. Insulin manages energy distribution. During reproductive years, these hormones maintain optimal levels, keeping the body in peak operational condition. Immune vigilance. The immune system during youth is aggressive, adaptive, and efficient. It identifies threats rapidly, mounts responses proportional to the danger, and remembers pathogens for future encounters. The thymus, the organ that trains T cells, is large and active. Inflammatory responses are controlled, deployed when needed, and stood down when the threat passes. This is the fortress. This is what it means to have a body that biological is heavily invested in preserving. Now watch what happens after reproductive utility peaks. Now the DNA repair efficiently declines. The same mechanisms that caught errors so efficiently begin to miss more of them. Base repair slows. Nucleotide repair becomes less thorough. Double-strand break repair, which requires significant cellular resources, is deprioritized. The result? Mutations accumulate faster. Errors that would have been caught and corrected in youth now become permanent fixtures. Cellular quality control weakens. The system designed to eliminate damaged cells become less stringent. Senescent cells that should have been cleared, accumulate in tissues. These zombie cells don't divide, but they secrete inflammatory signals that damage surrounding healthy tissue. Autophagy slows, leaving damaged cellular components to accumulate. The immune system's cancer surveillance becomes less vigilant. Hormonal signals destabilize. Growth hormone production drops. Sex hormones decline. Testosterone in men, estrogen and progesterone in women. Thyroid functions often slow. Insulin sensitivity decreases. The precise orchestration that characterized youth becomes a less coordinated ensemble. Systems that communicated seamlessly begin to miscommunicate. Immune function shifts. The thymus shrinks dramatically after puberty and continues shrinking throughout life. Production of T cell drops. The immune system becomes more inflammatory and less precise. Instead of surgical strikes against specific threats, it produces chronic, low-grade inflammation that damages the body's own tissues. This is not disease. This is not malfunction. This is biological program executing exactly as written. This is not because the body is designed to fail. It's because there is no biological imperative to preserve it indefinitely. Longevity beyond reproduction is, from a strictly genetic standpoint, a bonus, not a priority. DNA has no investment in your existence past the point where you've successfully passed the codon. Your continued survival offers no genetic advantage once reproduction is complete. This is the part most people have never been told. The body does not receive an execution order after midlife. It receives something more subtle, a withdrawal of justification. The fierce, urgent, all hands on deck preservation that characterized youth was driven by genetic imperative. That imperative has now been satisfied, and it is absent. The systems that once fought so hard to begin to relax. Not because they've been told to shut down, because nothing is telling them to keep going with the same intensity. From the inside, this feels like betrayal. You did everything right. You took care of yourself, you exercised, ate well, managed stress, avoided the obvious dangers, and yet the body is slowly, steadily, unmistakably declining. It feels personal. It feels like failure. It feels like something has gone wrong. But from the perspective of your DNA, nothing has gone wrong. Everything is proceeding exactly as coded. The vehicle served its purpose. The code was transmitted. Mission accomplished. What happens to the vehicle afterward is simply not the code's concern. Think about what this means. Your DNA, the genetic material that built you, that runs your body, that coordinates trillions of cellular operations every second, does not care whether you live another day past the fulfillment of its reproductive mission. That sounds harsh. It is harsh, but it's also true. DNA is not malicious. It's not cruel. It's not personal. It's just code. And the code was written for survival through reproduction. Nothing more. Everything else, your conscience, your relationships, your sense of meaning, your awareness of your own mortality, your longing for something beyond the biological, exist in a domain that DNA cannot access and did not create. The body says, stand down. Something else in you says, no. What is that something else? I want you to feel the weight of this before we continue. The scientific establishment, both religious and secular, has known about this phenomenon for decades. The mechanisms of post-reproductive decline are well documented. The biological pattern is observable and measurable. The timeline is mapped. And yet most people live their entire lives without ever being told that their body was not designed to preserve them indefinitely. They notice the decline. They feel the betrayal. They watch their parents and grandparents follow the same trajectory. But they frame it as a disease, bad luck, poor lifestyle choices. Anything except what it actually is. Biology executing its program. The body doing exactly what the code instructs. The fortress standing down because its mission has been accomplished. This produces a peculiar kind of psychological suffering. You watch your body change and you don't understand why. You do everything right. You exercise, you eat well, you manage stress, you get your checkups, and yet the decline continues. You rage against it. You spend thousands on supplements, treatments, procedures. You fight with everything you have. And the decline continues anyway. Because you're not fighting a malfunction. You're fighting the design. The body is not broken. It's following orders. And the orders say, reproductive mission complete. Begin managed decline. This is why anti-aging efforts produce such limited results. You can slow the decline. You can manage the systems. You can buy a few extra years of function, but you cannot override the fundamental biological logic that says your preservation is no longer a priority. The code doesn't care about your bucket list. The code doesn't care about the grandchildren you want to see grow up. The code doesn't care about the wisdom you've accumulated or the contribution you still want to make. The code cares about one thing. Was the genetic material transmitted? Yes? Then the code's job is done. What happens next is not its concern. This raises a question that science cannot answer. If the body is simply following genetic programming, if decline after reproduction is the designed and inevitable trajectory, then why do humans universally experience it as wrong. Animals don't seem troubled by aging. A dog doesn't question its mortality. A salmon doesn't protest that it dies after spawning. Only humans rage against the biological script. Only humans develop medicine, religion, philosophy, elaborate systems designing to deny, delay, and transcend the death that biology has scheduled. If we are merely survival machines, if DNA's logic is the final word, why don't we accept our faith with the equanimity of every other biological organism? The protest itself is evidence of something beyond biology. The rage is a clue, and the clue points somewhere the laboratories cannot follow. Chapter 3, Genetic Entropy, the Silent Confession. Let me be unmistakably clear about what this chapter is not. This is not evolution worship. This is not a concession to Darwinian mythology, dressed up in softer language. I am not suggesting, explicitly or implicitly, that humanity emerged from lower life forms through blind processes over deep time. Adam was a direct and intentional creation of Yahweh, formed from the dust, animated by divine breath, fashioned in the image of Elohim. Evolution is not merely flawed, it is false. But here is the irony. The most devastating critique of Darwinism is not coming from theology at all. It is coming from within the very science meant to defend it. The critique is known as genetic entropy. Dr. John C. Sanford spent decades as a geneticist at Cornell University. He invented the gene gun, a technology that revolutionized genetic engineering and is still used in laboratories worldwide. His credentials in the field are beyond question. For most of his career, Dr. Sanford accepted the standard evolutionary narrative. He believed what had been taught, that life arose from random mutation and natural selection, that complexity increased over time, that the genome was a product of simple processes gradually refining themselves toward greater sophistication. Then he looked more closely at the data. What Sanford discovered shattered the Darwinian narrative. DNA does not improve over time. It deteriorates. Here's what the textbooks don't emphasize. The human genome contains approximately 3 billion base pairs, 3 billion letters in the genetic code. Every time a cell divides, this entire sequence must be copied, and copying errors are inevitable. How many errors? The best estimates suggest between 60 and 100 new mutations occur in each human generation. Not in each person over their lifetime, in each transmission from parent to child. Every baby is born with approximately 100 mutations that their parents did not have. Now, what kinds of mutations are these? If Darwinian evolution were true, some reasonable proportion of these mutations would be beneficial, providing advantages that natural selection could preserve and accumulate. Over millions of years, beneficial mutations should build up, gradually increasing complexity and capability. But that's not what the data shows. The overwhelming majority of mutations, estimates range from 99.9% to 99.999%, are either harmful or neutral. They either damage functions or have no effect. Truly beneficial mutations are so rare that they're almost never observed. And here's the critical problem. Natural selection cannot see most harmful mutations. Natural selections work by differential reproduction. Organisms with advantaged traits reproduce more successfully than organisms without those traits. Over time, the advantageous traits spread through the population. But this mechanism has a fatal limitation. It can only act on mutations that have a measurable effect on reproduction. Most mutations are what geneticists call nearly neutral. They're harmful, but only slightly. They reduce function by tiny amounts, imperceptible in any individual, but cumulative across generations. Natural selection cannot eliminate these mutations because their effects are too small to influence reproductive success. The result is what Sanford calls genetic entropy, the slow, steady accumulation of slightly harmful mutations, generation after generation, despite natural selections. The genomes of all living creatures are slowly degenerating due to the accumulation of slightly harmful mutations. This is happening in spite of natural selection. That's pretty serious. Amen. Despite natural selection, despite the vaunted mechanism that supposedly drives evolutionary progress, despite the filter that's supposed to eliminate the unfit and preserve the beneficial, the genome is deteriorating anyway. Let me put this in practical terms. Imagine you have a document, a very long, very complex document containing precise instructions. Every time you copy this document, a few errors creep in. Most of the errors are small. A misplaced letter here, a slightly wrong number there. Individually, there's almost unnoticeable. But the errors never get corrected. They just accumulate. Each copy contains all the errors of the previous copy plus a few new ones. What happens over thousands of copies? The document degrades. The instructions become less precise. The signal gets buried in noise. Eventually, the document becomes unusable, not because of one catastrophic error, but because of the relentless accumulation of small ones. This is what's happening to the human genome. Each generation inherits all the mutations of previous generations plus new ones. The genetic document that contains the instructions for building and running a human body is slowly becoming corrupted. Not only is mutation selection incapable of creating other genomes, it can't even preserve ours. Dr. John Sanford. The code cannot save you. It cannot even save itself. Dr. Michael Behe, another credentialed biochemist, summarized the problem this way. Not only does Darwinism not have answers for how many informations got into the genome, it doesn't even have answers for how it could remain there. This is the silent confession of genetics, the very mechanism that was supposed to explain life's origin and development turns out to be incapable of preserving the complexity that already exists. DNA is running downhill. The genome is degrading. The instructions are becoming less precise with each generation. And natural selection, the hero of the Darwinian narrative, it's powerless to stop it. What does this mean for the individual? It means that the genetic code you inherited is already degraded compared to what your great-grandparents had. And the code you pass on will be slightly more degraded than what you received. It means that DNA offers no trajectory toward improvement, only toward decline. It means that the biological foundation of human life is not climbing toward greater capability, but sliding toward dysfunction. This is not a theological argument. This is measured, documented, peer-reviewed science. The genome is accumulating damage faster than selection can remove it. We are not evolving upward. We are devolving downward. Think about what this means for the evolutionary narrative. Evolution tells a story of progress, from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced, from single cells to human beings, upward and onward, the march of life toward ever greater sophistication. Genetic entropy tells the opposite story. The genome is deteriorating. The code is degrading. The information is being lost, not gained. Far from building new complexity, the system cannot even preserve the complexity it already has. This is not compatible with the Darwinian narrative. You cannot have billions of years of improvement when the mechanism produces relentless degradation. The numbers don't work. The math doesn't add up. The story collapses under its own assumptions. And yet the scientific establishment continues to teach evolution as fact because the alternative, acknowledging that life had a designer, is ideologically unacceptable. But the data doesn't care about ideology. The genome is still degrading. The mutations are still accumulating. The signal is still being lost to noise. This brings us back to where we started. DNA cannot save you. It cannot even save itself. Natural selection doesn't improve DNA. It filters survivability under local conditions. That's all it can do. A mutation that helps you survive in a specific environment is not an improvement to the human genome. It's a situational adaptation that works here, now, under these specific conditions. Change the environment, and that same mutation can become useless, even harmful. Calling environmental adaptation DNA improvement is rhetoric, not rigor. It's marketing, not science. The real question is this: can blind selection indefinitely preserve functional complexity in the face of relentless mutational decay? The evidence says no. The genome is not climbing upward toward greater complexity and capability. It is sliding downward toward degradation. Each generation inherits slightly more genetic noise than the one before. The signal to noise ratio is declining. And yet, here is the mystery. Humanity refuses to accept this trajectory. We rage against decline. We grieve aging. We pour billions into medical research trying to extend life, reverse damage, cheat death. We act as though decay is wrong, as though we were meant for something other than entropy. Why? If we are merely the products of a deteriorating genetic code, if we are nothing but survival machines for selfish molecules, why don't we accept our faith with the equanimity of every other biological organism? Why does something in us insist that this is not how it's supposed to be? The evolutionary story collapses under its own assumptions right here. A system driven solely by survival has no intrinsic mechanism for long-term preservation or high-order complexity. It can maintain function temporarily under selective pressure, but it cannot generate or safeguard meaning, coherence, or upward direction. Selection does not build, it merely filters. Selection does not create information, it only eliminates what fails fastest. Over time, the relentless accumulation of small errors overwhelms the system, not in dramatic collapse, but in slow, silent decay. The genome does not crash, it frays. As yet, humanity stubbornly refuses to live as though survival is enough. We pursue truth at personal cost. We sacrifice advantage for principle. We seek meaning that transcends biology, legacy that outlives reproduction, righteousness that contradicts self-interest. These impulses do not arise from DNA. They cannot be reduced to chemistry. They cannot be explained by selection. A survival-coded system cannot account for a creature that routinely chooses suffering over safety and faithfulness over fitness. That tension is not incidental. It is revelatory. It points back to Genesis, to a man formed from dust. Yes, but animated by something no molecule can explain. Adam was not merely a biological organism optimized for endurance. He was a theological being designed for relationship, obedience, and truth. Genetic entropy exposes the limits of Darwinism, but it also illuminates something far greater. Life did not originate from blind survival, and it will not be explained by it. But Yahweh breathed into man was never encoded in DNA, and no amount of mutation can account for it or erase it. Chapter 4, Cancer and the Logic of Survival. Cancer is not an aberration in the biological system. Cancer is a revelation of it. Here in Chapter 4, Cancer and the Logic of Survival. Most people think of cancer as a disease, something foreign that invades the body, something alien that attacks from outside, but that's not what cancer is. Cancer is your own cells, your own DNA, your own tissue turned against you. This distinction matters enormously. Cancer is not an invader, it is a defector. Cancer happens when DNA damage accumulates beyond the cell's ability to repair it. The repair mechanisms that are supposed to catch errors and fix them become overwhelmed or compromised. Cell cycle controls breakdown. The checkpoints that are supposed to prevent damaged cells from dividing fail. Cells that should have been stopped are allowed to proceed. Mutated cells begin prioritizing their own replication over cooperation with the body. Instead of serving the organism, they begin serving themselves. And here is the darkest part from the evolutionary standpoint. A cancer cell is genetically successful. Think about what that means. A cancer cell replicates faster than healthy cells. It consumes more resources. It spreads more aggressively. It survives longer within its environment. By every metric that evolution uses to define success, replication, resource acquisition, survival, a cancer cell is winning. It's winning while killing the body that hosts it. This is not a paradox in evolutionary terms. This is survival logic taken to its conclusion. Cancer cells don't know they're killing their host. They don't intend to destroy the organism. They're simply doing what cells do when the constraints are removed: replicating, consuming, spreading, surviving. The cancer cell is not malfunctioning. It has been liberated from the cooperative agreements that normally constrain cellular behavior. It is now free to pursue its own survival without regard for the whole. This is what happens when survival is the only value. And this is why we instinctively call selfish people cancers. The language is not accidental. A person who defects from the cooperative project pursues their own advancement at the expense of family, community, nation. Is going at the social level exactly what a cancer cell does at a biological level. They consume without contributing. They replicate their influence without regard for the health of the whole. They succeed by the metrics of survival while destroying the body that hosts them. The metaphor works because the mechanism is the same. Survival logic without moral constraint. Let me explain the cooperation problem. Your body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. These cells must cooperate with extraordinary precision for you to function. Each cell must limit its own reproduction, share resources with neighboring cells, respond to signals from distant tissues, and sacrifice itself when necessary for the good of the organism. This cooperation is not natural. It is enforced. Cells don't want to cooperate. Left to their own devices, cells would replicate without limit, consume all available resources, and ignore signals from other tissues. This is exactly what cancer cells do. They've escaped the enforcement mechanisms. The enforcement mechanisms exist precisely because cellular cooperation is fragile. The body must constantly police its own cells to prevent defection. When that policing fails, when the enforcement mechanisms break down, cancer emerges. Cancer is what cells do when they're no longer forced to cooperate. And here's where the survival logic becomes truly dark. Your body's policing mechanisms are most active during reproductive years. Why? Because a cancer that kills you before you produce represents a genetic dead end. Natural selection has strong incentive to prevent cancers that strike in young people. But what about cancers that emerge after reproduction? From a genetic standpoint, they don't matter. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. In the United States, the median age for a cancer diagnosis across all cancer types is 66 to 67 years old. Half of all cancers are diagnosed before that age, half after. Most cancers occur in people 55 and older, with a significant spike as people reach their 60s and beyond. This is not coincidence. This is biology executing its programming. A cancer that kills you at 66 has no evolutionary significance. The genes have already been passed on decades ago. The code was transmitted in your 20s or 30s. Whatever mutations allowed that cancer to develop, whatever weaknesses in the policing mechanisms permitted those cells to defect, they're already in the next generation. Natural selection had no reason to eliminate them because they didn't affect reproduction. This is why cancer rates increase dramatically with age. It's not just that mutations have had more time to accumulate, it's that the body's investment in cancer prevention decreases after reproductive utility ends. The policing mechanisms that were so vigilant in youth begin to relax. Cellular surveillance becomes less aggressive. Quality control standards drop. And cells that would have been caught and eliminated during reproductive years are now allowed to proliferate. The median age of 66 to 67 is not arbitrary. It represents the convergence of accumulated mutations with declining biological vigilance. It marks the point where most people have lived long enough past their reproductive years that the body's cancer defenses have substantially disengaged. Your DNA was invested in keeping you cancer-free at 25. It has far less investment at 65. The vehicle served its purpose decades ago. What happens to it now is simply not the code's concern. This is the logic of survival without morality. This is what happens when replication is the only value, when success is defined purely in terms of genetic propagation, when there is no higher principle to constrain the drive to survive and spread. Cancer is not nature cleaning house. It is not evolution selecting for better outcomes. It is nature losing control. It is the survival mandate run amok, unchecked by any principle higher than itself. DNA does not prevent cancer because DNA is not coded for the preservation of the individual. DNA is coded for survival of the genetic line long enough to reproduce. After that, the individual becomes expendable, and the same mechanisms that drove survival during reproductive years, aggressive cellular replication, resource acquisition, competitive advantage, can turn malignant when the body's control system begins to disengage. Cancer is not the failure of the system. Cancer is the system operating without moral constraint. Cancer is the system operating without moral constraint. A cell that defects from the cooperative project of the body and begins pursuing its own replication at the expenses of everything else is doing exactly what survival logic would predict. If survival logic is all there is, the body offers no moral veto. DNA has no category for this is wrong. These are only what replicates and what doesn't. Consider what this reveals about the nature of biological existence. Cooperation. The foundation of complex life is not built into the system. It is exposed on the system. It is enforced through elaborate mechanisms that must constantly suppress the natural tendencies of cells to defect. And that enforcement has a purpose: reproduction. When the purpose is fulfilled, the enforcement relaxes. When the enforcement relaxes, defection becomes possible. When defection occurs, we call it cancer. This is the hard truth that biology confesses if you listen carefully. A system governed solely by survival tolerates destruction so long as reproduction has already occurred. DNA will not stop cancer from killing you at 60 because DNA's interest in you ended when you passed the code on at 30. The vehicle served its purpose. What happens to it afterward is not the code's concern. But something in you rejects this. Something in you insists that cancer is wrong. Not just inconvenient, not just unfortunate, but wrong in a way that demands resistance. Something in you treats the body as though it deserves preservation beyond reproductive utility. Something in you grieves death as an enemy, not as a natural conclusion or a completed mission. Where does that something come from? Not from DNA. DNA wrote no such protest into its code. Not from evolution. Evolution has no category for wrong, only for selected against. Not from chemistry. Molecules do not grieve. The body follows the biological script. Cancer is part of that script. The dark side of survival logic. The inevitable result of a system without transcendent purpose. But the human being refuses to accept the script as final. We fight. We resist. We rage against the dying of the light. And that rage does not come from ourselves. It comes from somewhere else. Somewhere the microscope cannot reach. Somewhere the genome does not map. That somewhere is what this book is ultimately about. Chapter 5. The Reduction. Now we arrive at the horror. Everything we've examined so far leads to a single devastation conclusion. A conclusion that modern atheism has embraced with something like pride, and that most people have never allowed themselves to think through to its logical end. If DNA is all there is, if human beings are merely vehicles for genetic code, survival machines blindly programmed to preserve selfish molecules, then what are we really? Richard Dawkins answered that question with chilling clarity. We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. He meant this as a description of reality, but he accidentally wrote an indictment. If Dawkins is right, if this is genuinely all we are, then human beings have no inherent dignity, no intrinsic worth, no purpose beyond the transmission of genetic material. We are vehicles. We are tools. We are temporary carriers of code that use us for its own propagation and discards us when we are no longer useful. Let me unfold the implications because they need to be faced unflinchingly. If DNA is the final word on human existence, you are not a person. You are a delivery system for genetic code. Your sense of self, your consciousness, your awareness, these are incidental features of a machine designed for replication. They may help the machine function, but they are not the point. The code is the point. You are just the vehicle. If DNA is the final word on human existence, then your relationship has no intrinsic value. They only matter insofar as they contribute to reproductive success. The love you feel for your spouse, your children, your friends are neurochemical states that evolved because they increase the likelihood of genetic transmission. They feel profound, but they're just biological mechanisms serving the code. If DNA is the final word on human existence, your search for meaning is a malfunction. DNA doesn't need you to find meaning. DNA needs you to reproduce. Your hunger for purpose, your longing for transistence, your sense that there must be something more, these are bugs, not features. These waste energy that could be better spent on survival and reproduction. If DNA is the final word on human existence, your death is not a tragedy. It's a scheduled disposal. The vehicle has served its purpose. Continued maintenance is not cost effective. Shutdown is not failure. It's completion. The code has been transmitted. The mission is accomplished. What happens to the delivery vehicle afterward is irrelevant. If DNA is the final word on human existence, your elderly years are biological overtime. You have outlived your genetic usefulness. Every resource spent keeping you alive is a resource that could have been invested in the next generation. From DNA's perspective, you are now a drain on the system rather than a contributor to it. If DNA is the final word on human existence, your aspirations beyond reproduction are evolutionary noise. The desire to create art, discover truth, build something lasting, leave a legacy beyond children, these impulses serve no genetic function. They are misfiring of neural circuits that evolved for other purposes. They feel important, but they're biologically meaningless. This is the logical conclusion of biological materialism. This is what you get when DNA has the final word. And the most disturbing part, the view is internally consistent. If you accept the premise that we are nothing but the products of blind evolution, survival machines for selfish genes, then these conclusions follow necessarily. The only way out is to reject the premise. Let me say it plainly because the implications need to be faced. Without the kingdom message, a man is a sperm donor. Without the kingdom message, a woman is a waiting age. Strip away culture, romance, sentiment, and spiritual language. What remains if DNA is the final word? Biology's assignment: reproduce, then expire. The man exists to deliver genetic material. The woman exists to receive it, gestate it, and deliver it. Once the transaction is complete, once the code has been passed, biology no longer needs either of them. You are not a person to DNA. You are a delivery system. The secular world already knows this, whether it admits it or not. Look at what modernity has produced. Sperm banks, egg harvesting, surrogate wombs, designer babies, genetic screening to eliminate defective embryos, the commodification of reproduction stripped in relationship, meaning, and permanence. But it goes deeper than reproductive technology. Look at how we treat the elderly, warehoused in facilities, visited on holidays, their wisdom dismissed as outdated, their presence treated as burden rather than blessing. Biology says they've outlived their usefulness, and our culture increasingly agrees. Look at how we treat the disabled. Measured by their productivity, their contribution to society, their ability to participate in economic activity. Biology says they're defective, failures of the quality control system. Our culture increasingly treats them as problems to be managed rather than persons to be honored. Look at how we treat the unborn, reduced to clumps of cells, disposed of when inconvenient, their humanity denied until some arbitrary point of viability. Biology says they're just genetic potential, not yet realized. Our culture increasingly agrees. Look at how we treat ourselves, optimizing for productivity, measuring our worth by our output, treating our bodies as machines to be maintained only as long as they serve our purposes. Biology says we're tools. We've started to believe it. This is not the perversion of biology. This is biology made explicit. If there is no kingdom, if there is no transcendent purpose, if there is no next new, then this secular approach is simply being honest about what we are. Donors and carriers, producers and incubators, instruments of life waiting to die. The horror is not that this view exists. The horror is that it's correct if DNA is the final word. But here is where the witnesses begin to testify against the prosecution's case. Even within the secular world, voices emerge that cannot explain themselves on materialistic terms. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps. Auschwitz, Dachau, places where human beings were reduced to numbers, to labor units, to disposable tools of an ideology. He watched people die by the thousands. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. And in that horror, he observed something that materialistic biology cannot explain. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. The prisoners who survived, against all medical probability, against all biological logic, were not necessarily the strongest, the youngest, or the healthiest. They were the ones who maintained a sense of purpose, a loved one waiting for them, a work unfinished, a reason beyond survival. Purpose, Frankl discovered, could override biology. There is something in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. This is empirical observation, not religious sentiment. Frankl documented case after case of prisoners who, by every biological metric, should have died, but didn't. Something kept them alive that DNA cannot account for. And he documented the inverse. Prisoners who had no reason to live often died quickly, even when their physical condition was no worse than others. Their biological could have sustained them, but without purpose, the body gave up. Woe to him who saw no more sense in his life, no aim, no purpose, and therefore no point in carrying on. He was soon lost. Then we go to C.S. Lewis, observed the same phenomenon from a different angle. Friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art. It has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things which give value to survival. Think about that carefully. The highest things in human experience, friendship, philosophy, art, love, beauty, truth, have no survival value. They do not help us reproduce. They do not extend our biological existence. They do not serve the genetic mandate. And yet, they are precisely what makes existence worth having. DNA cannot explain the Sistine Chapel. Evolution cannot account for Bach. Natural selection has no category for sacrifice, for heroism, for truth pursued at personal cost. If we are merely survival machines, these things should not exist. They waste resources. They distract from reproduction. They serve no genetic purpose. And yet, they are the things we value most. C.S. Lewis said, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in the world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." The desire itself is evidence. The hunger is a clue. The longing for something beyond biology points to an origin and a destiny that DNA cannot account for. Until a man finds the kingdom message, he simply exists as a tool of biology. That sentence should stop you cold. Until a man finds the kingdom message, he simply exists as a tool of biology. Before the kingdom message is heard, a man is a vehicle for DNA, a carrier of code, a reproduction machine, a temporary host, a means to an end he will never see. He does not use his biology uses him. He thinks he is living. He is being lived through. He thinks he has purpose. He has function. He thinks he is building a legacy. He is passing along sequences. DNA does not serve man. Man serves DNA. This is the reduction. This is what happens when biology is allowed the final word. This is the logical conclusion of a worldview that begins and ends with chemistry. And the tragedy is not that atheists believe it. The tragedy is that millions of believers have never heard the message that answers it. They got saved. They received forgiveness. They have the blood on the doorpost and the promise of heaven when they die. But between now and then, they live like everyone else. They age like everyone else. They follow the same biological script toward the same biological end. They've been rescued from the penalty of sin, but they've never been given a purpose that transcends their DNA. They are saved tools, but still tools. Here is what the kingdom message does. It speaks to the man and it says, "You are not a sperm donor. You are a king in training. You have a throne. You have a government. You have an assignment that will outlast your biology and extend into the next new creation." Revelations 5 verse 10 says, "And has made us into our Elohim kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth." It speaks to the woman and says, "You are not a waiting egg. You are a queen being formed. You have a seat beside the king. You have dominion. You have purpose that reproduction could never fulfill and death could never terminate." Galatians chapter 3 verse 28 and 29 says, "There is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Messiah Yeshua. And if ye be Messiahs, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." It speaks to the elderly and says, "You have not outlived your usefulness. You are entering your most important training period. The wisdom you've accumulated is not evolutionary noise. It is kingdom curriculum. The years ahead are not managed decline. They are intensive preparation for rule." Proverbs 16 verse 31 says, "The hoary head is a crown of glory, if it be found in the way of righteousness." Look at Psalms 92 verse 14. "They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing." It speaks to the disabled and says, your value was never measured by productivity. Your worth was never defined by function. You are not defective. You are being shaped for purposes that biology cannot measure and the world cannot understand. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. But Yahweh said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For Yahweh seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but Yahweh looketh on the heart. It speaks to every human being made in the image of Yahweh and says, you are not a survival machine. You are a son of the Most High, being prepared for an inheritance that DNA cannot imagine and death cannot reach. 1 John chapter 3, verse 2 states, beloved, now are we the sons of Yahweh, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Romans chapter 8, verse 16 and 17 says, the Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit, that we are the children of Yahweh, and if children, then heirs, heirs of Yahweh, and joint heirs with Messiah. The kingdom message does not merely save you from something. It saves you for something. It does not merely rescue you from the penalty of sin. It recruits you for the government of eternity. It does not merely forgive your past. It assigns your future. The dignity that the kingdom restores is not cheap dignity or self-esteem. It is not the hollow dignity of human rights declarations. It is not the sentimental dignity of everyone is special. It is the dignity of assignment. You have a role in a government that will outlast the sun. You have a position in the administration that will never end. You have been recruited for something that DNA cannot imagine and biology cannot explain. That is not sentiment. That is vocation. And vocation changes everything. When you know you are destined for government, survival becomes merely preliminary. When you understand your assignment extends beyond biology, DNA's verdict becomes irrelevant. When you grasp that you are being trained for rule, that body's decline becomes preparation rather than defeat, this is what the kingdom message does. It doesn't fight biology. It transcends it. It doesn't extend survival. It replaces survival as the organizing principle of existence. And that changes everything about how you live, how you age, and how you face what biology has scheduled. But here is the problem. Millions of believers have never heard this message. They heard the gospel about Christ, his death, his burial, his resurrection, the forgiveness available through his blood. But they never heard the gospel of Christ, the actual message he preached before the apostles ever explained how to get saved. And what did Yeshua preach? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Let me break that down because the church has reduced this announcement to feel sorry for your sins. Repent. Repent. Return to the covenant life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Turn around from breaking the law of the covenant. Return to obedience. This is not merely emotional regret. It is covenantal realignment. Come back to Torah. Come back to the instructions. Come back to the way of life that Yahweh established with the fathers. And the first sign of that return referred to as making aliyah. Among the Hebrews is a going down into the waters of mikveh, or baptism, in the name of Yeshua Messiah for the remission of your law breaking. For the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Why return? Why now? Because the glorious government of the manifested sons of Yahweh is soon to arrive. The reign is approaching. The administration is being assembled. The rulers are being trained. And your destiny lies in that kingdom. Not believe in me and go to heaven when you die. Not accept me as your personal savior and wait. Yeshua's message was, the government is coming. You were made for that government. Return to covenant so you can take your place in it. The kingdom, government, dominion, rule. That is the message that activates life beyond survival. That is the word that speaks to something deeper than DNA. That is what transforms a tool of biology into a son of the Most High. Without that message, you remain what DNA made you, a survival machine that has outlived its usefulness. With that message, you become what Yahweh intended, a ruler in training, preparing for a government that will never end. But here is the critical element. The message must be heard. Faith comes by hearing. Hearing comes by the word. The word must be preached. The message must reach the ears before it can reach the heart. This is not automatic. This is not mystical absorption. Someone must proclaim it. Someone must receive it. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? The kingdom message, the actual gospel Yeshua preached, activates something that DNA cannot touch. But it only activates what it reaches, and millions have never heard it. They heard a different message, a partial message, a truncated gospel, a Passover without journey. They were told about forgiveness, but not about assignment. They were told about rescue, but not about recruitment. They were told about blood on the doorpost, but not about shoes on their feet. And so they remain at Passover, saved, but stationary, forgiven, but functionless, delivered from Egypt, but never deployed for Canaan. The difference is not cosmetic. The difference is everything. We have now descended through the laboratory. We have examined what DNA actually does and what it cannot do. We have confronted the cold logic of survival and the horror of biological reductionism. We have heard witnesses from both sides, the atheist who inadvertently indicted humanity, the Holocaust survivor who documented purpose overriding biology, the philosopher who recognized that the highest beings have no survival value. The scientific case is established. The body follows a script written for survival through reproduction. After that mission is complete, the script offers nothing but managed decline. But the human being protests. Something in us insists this is not the whole story. Something in us reaches for meaning that DNA cannot provide, purpose that biology cannot explain, life that transcends survival. That something is not a delusion. It is a signal. And the signal points toward a message. A specific message preached by a specific person, offering a specific remedy for the biological verdict we've just examined. The question is, why haven't most believers heard that message? Why does the church preach rescue but not recruitment? Why does salvation stop at the doorpost? The answer lies in a prison most believers don't know they're in. The prison made of blood and doorpost and waiting. A prison called Passover. This is the end of part 1 of the book written Living Beyond Survival by Apostle Shane Vaughn. All his work can be found at www.hiscomingkingdom.com. Yahweh's blessings, and please stay tuned for part 2 and the rest of the book that is being recorded. Yahweh's blessings and much, much peace into your home. Let truth prevaileth much. Thank you.